strategy Nash equilibrium for now, and let's focus on pure strategy Nash equilibrium. So, for example, here OF, what is it? So FO, that is Nash equilibrium because, okay, so let's look at player 1 first. If player 1 deviates and choose A, then payoff will be still 4, right? So A is not a profitable deviation of player 1 here, and player 2 also has no profitable deviation, right? So, by choosing O, player 2's final payoff is 0, and if she deviates, then payoff will be still 0. Okay? So in that sense, FO, that is a Nash equilibrium. And Fi, that is not a Nash equilibrium. Fi, that is not a Nash equilibrium because, for example, if player 1 chooses A rather than F, then his payoff will be larger. Okay, so Fi, that is not a Nash equilibrium. And similarly, AO, that this is also not a Nash equilibrium. And AI, this is Nash equilibrium, right? So because if player 1 deviates, then payoff will be 0, which is smaller than 2. And if player 2 deviates, then payoff will be 0, which is also smaller than 2. So AI, that is also a Nash equilibrium. Okay? So there are two pure strategy Nash equilibria here, FO and AI. Okay, so however, among these two pure strategy Nash equilibria, one is kind of reasonable, but the other one is totally unreasonable. Okay, so actually, okay, so there are two. Okay, so let's look at FO. So that has to be FO, not OF, because player 1's strategy has to appear first, right? So it has to be FO, not OF. Okay, so FO is pure strategy Nash equilibrium, but I'm gonna argue that this is actually not a reasonable outcome of this game. Why? Because let's think about what happens if player 2 deviates here. Okay? So player 2 is supposed to choose O, and player 1 is supposed to choose F. Okay? And that is Nash equilibrium because, first of all, O is player 2's best response given that player 1 will choose F. Okay? So O, this is actually important. Okay, so player 2, her strategy O is best response only if player 2 believes player 1 will choose F here. Okay? And that's exactly the reason why OF is Nash equilibrium here. Player 1 will choose F, and given that player 2's best response is O, okay? So I is not a profitable deviation. And in player 1's perspective, actually, as long as player 2 chooses O, his choice here is irrelevant, right? So, his choice does not make any change in terms of the outcome of the game. So actually, F and A, both of them are best responses for player 1. And it's particularly F is best response strategy, which can be a part of Nash equilibrium. Okay? But this is actually very weird, actually, however. Okay, so let's say player 2 deviates. and player 2 chooses I. Then what happens? So in equilibrium, player 1 is supposed to choose F, right? However, once player 1 finds himself in this situation, actually, it is better for him to choose A instead of F. Okay? So in that sense, F4, even if this is Nash equilibrium, actually this outcome is far from reasonable outcome. Okay? So what's happening here is basically, one way to interpret this thing, why OF is Nash equilibrium, why F4 can be Nash equilibrium, we can interpret these things like this. Okay, so F4, it involves a incredible threat of player 1 here. So player 1, what's happening here is, something like, player 1, threaten player 2, saying that if you enter the market, then I'm gonna choose to fight. Okay? And if player 2 believes that, clearly player 2's best response is O, right? And that is actually outcome good for player 1, right? And as long as player 2 believes player 1 will follow his announced strategy, then player 2 has no reason to choose I. But if he thinks about, if player 2 thinks about everything carefully again, he will find that player 1's announcement is actually very incredible, right? Because once player 2 actually enters the market, then player 1 will find, player 1 will seize, actually, contrary to his initial announcement, it is strictly better for player 1 to choose A. Okay? So the problem of this Nash equilibrium here at O, the problem here is the notion of Nash equilibrium does not capture that kind of reasoning we just made. Okay? So that's the reason, we can say F4 is not a reasonable outcome even if it is Nash equilibrium here. Okay? So the outcome, F4, that the Nash equilibrium here does not capture the problem of incredible threat. Okay, so then let's look at the other Nash equilibrium, A and I. It is just free from this kind of incredible threat stuff, problem of incredible threat. Okay, so in this second Nash equilibrium, AI, player 2 will choose I here, and then player 1 will choose A. Okay? So indeed, there is no really problem of incredible threat because player 1 will choose A, and which is actually indeed strictly the only best action player 1 can choose, actually in this second node here. Okay? Okay, so that's the reason. Okay, so that's the reason we say F4 is an incredible threat, unreasonable outcome. And actually, the only reasonable outcome here in this game is the second Nash equilibrium here, A and I. Okay. Okay, and let's look at the second example, started for game. Actually, this game also has a lot of Nash equilibria. Actually, I'm gonna leave it to as your exercise, but you can solve this game by yourself, and you will find that actually there are at least 2 Nash equilibria. However, there is only one reasonable outcome for this game. Okay, so here is the so let me review, let me review, what is the rule of the game again. In stage 0, player 1 chooses Q1, and in stage 1, player 2 will choose Q2, and then the outcome will be like this. Okay, so this is exactly the payoff we used for Chrono game. So this game is exactly equivalent to Chrono competition, except that now player 1 chooses first, and then player 2 chooses later. Okay, so probably the best way to solve this game is to solve everything backward. Okay, so player 2 has to maximize his own profit, right? So actually both of them have to maximize their profit. And okay, but player 2, what is difference between player 1 and player 2 here is player 2 can observe player 1's action before player 2 makes a decision. Okay? So then obviously player 2, in order to maximize his or her profit, player 2 has to use that information about player 1's choice. Okay? Okay, so let's say player 1 chooses Q1 in the first place, in the first stage, and it is observed by player 2. Okay? And now it is player 2's turn to make a decision. And player 2's decision, of course, has to maximize his or her profit. And this is the profit function of player 2. Okay, so here, let's say, to make everything simple, let's say demand function is given by 1 minus Q, where Q is again the sum of Q1 plus Q2. Okay? So if player 1, for example, if player 1 chooses 1/4 and player 2 chooses 1/4, then price will be 1/2. And let's say marginal cost is 0 and there is no fixed cost. Then this is the profit of player 2 when player 1 chooses Q1 and player 2 chooses Q2. So here, the thing in the bracket here, 1 minus Q1 and Q2, that is the price, and Q2 is the quantity. So 1 minus Q1 minus Q2 times Q2, that is revenue. And there is no cost, so revenue is equal to profit. So player 2 has to choose Q1 in order to maximize this profit. Okay? What is important here is Q1 is already chosen by player 1. Okay? Okay, so player 2 has to solve profit maximization problem after he observes Q1. Okay, then how can we solve this problem? Okay, we can solve this problem by the first order condition. Okay? So if you take derivative of this objective function, then so we have Q2 here. So if you differentiate this part, then the result will be -1. And we have Q2 here. So Q2 plus, if you take derivative of this part, that will be 1. So 1 minus Q1 minus Q2. Okay? So that is the derivative of profit function here. So first order condition requires to equate it with 0. And we have 2 Q's here. So this thing is actually equivalent to 1 minus Q1 minus 2 Q2 is equal to 0, which is equivalent to, okay, so let's move this term to the other side. So we have 1 minus Q1 is equal to Q times Q2, 2 times Q2, which is equivalent to saying Q2 is equal to 1 over Q1 divided by 2. Okay? Okay, so this is the profit maximizing quantity for player 2. Okay, so the first thing we can see here is this thing Q2, the player 2's choice depends on Q1. Okay? So which is kind of natural. No? That means player 2 actually uses the information about player 1's choice in the previous stage. Right? So player 2 can observe player 1's decision before player 2 makes an action, take an action. So player 2 is better for him or her, better for player 2 actually to use that information. Right? So that's not really surprising at all. Player 2 has to use information of his. And indeed, if you solve this problem by using the first order condition, indeed you can see player 2 indeed uses, make a use of that information. Player 2's fast response depends on the observation Q, the Q1. Okay? Okay, so so this shows that player 2 will choose this thing if player 2 maximizes profit, which he has to do, indeed. Okay, so then remember that here we assume everything's are rational and also rationality is common knowledge, right? So which means that player 1 also knows that player 2 will choose Q2 using this rule. Okay? So for example, let's say player 1 chooses Q1 equals 1/2, then player 1 will understand player 2 will choose Q2 using this formula after observing Q1 being equal to 1/2. And if player 2 chooses other numbers, then player 2 will change player 2's action choice as well using this rule. Okay? So which means that the player 1's profit function will be, okay, so remember this is price, okay, so price is always 1 minus Q1 minus Q2, and we are looking at player 1's problem, so now we put Q1 here, so this is profit of player 1, okay, and player 1 has to choose Q1 to maximize it, so this is P1's problem, player 1's problem, and it was player 2's problem. Okay, however, player 1 understands Q2 will be equal to 1 minus Q1 divided by 2. So actually this profit function is, in player 1's perspective, this is equal to 1 minus Q1 minus 1 minus Q1 divided by 2 times Q1. Okay? So what we are doing here, what's happening here is, what's going on here is, player 1 knows his choice affects player 2's choice. Okay? So when player 1 takes an action, player 1 has to take that effect into account. Okay? So that's exactly what's going on here. Player 1's decision will affect Q2, so taking that effect into account, this is actually profit of player 1 at the end of the day. Okay, so player 1 would like to maximize this thing, and we can maximize this profit function again by first order condition. So if you take derivative of this thing, then so now Q1. So here we have minus 1 and plus 1/2, right? So if you take derivative of this thing, then it will be minus 1 plus 1/2 times Q1. Okay? So this is derivative of this thing with respect to Q1 plus this. And because derivative of Q1 is simply 1, so we have actually 1 here, but we can ignore this. Okay? So the first order condition requires this derivative equals to 0. Okay? And if you solve this problem, then you will see actually Q1 will be 1/2. Okay? Okay, so reasoning this way, so we can see player 1 will choose 1/2, and then observing this choice, player 2 will choose Q2 equals to 1 minus 1/2 divided by 2, which is 1/4. Okay? Okay, so if you look at this is clearly very different from the outcome of static game, outcome of normal form game. Remember that for Grunov game, static Grunov game, there is only one Nash equilibrium, right? And in that unique Nash equilibrium, probably you don't really remember every details, but one thing you probably can remember is in that unique Nash equilibrium, all players they choose the same quantity. Right? But here, this is already not the case in this case, in this dynamic game, because you can see clearly here, player 1 chooses 1/2, which is different from Q2. Okay? And you can also check by yourself, if you calculate the realized profit here, then you can see player 1's profit is actually higher than player 2. Okay? So that is something economists usually call first mover's advantage. Player 1 moves first, and that is a huge advantage for player 1. So that results in higher profit for player 1. Okay, so summing up our discussion on Star-Kelberg game here, so there are two important things here. First, given that, maybe three important things. Okay, so let me put everything step by step, one by one. First of all, player 2 takes an action, moves after player 2 observes Q1. Okay? So which means that player 2's best response depends on his or her observation of Q1. Okay? So that's the first thing here, important thing here, and mathematically that is what we exactly did here. Okay? And then that means player 1 will understand his own choice will affect player 2's choice, player 2's decision. Okay? And that means when player 1 chooses an action or Q1, player 1 has to that effect into account. Okay? And mathematically, that is exactly corresponding to what we did here, this part of the work. Player 1 takes into account that Q2 depends on Q1. Okay? And then reasoning results in the conclusion that the only reasonable outcome here is Q1 equal to 1/2 and Q2 equal to 1/4. Okay? And coming back to our first example here, the reason that FO is not a reasonable outcome is, the reason is actually here player 2 does not take into account that his choice will change player 1's choice in the second stage. Right? So here player 2 blindly assuming that, okay, so we are looking at the FO, Nash equilibrium FO. So in this equilibrium, player 2 blindly believes that player 1 will choose F. Right? But what is missing here is, what he misses here is, player 2 basically, ignore the effect of his own action on player 1's decision in the second stage. Okay? So basically that's the reason why FO is not a reasonable outcome. And AI is actually a reasonable outcome. Okay? So in dynamic game, lesson we can take here is, in dynamic game, every player has to take into account that his or her action today will change the situation tomorrow. Okay? Okay, and that also tells us that actually the reasonable way to solve the game, extensible game, is something we can call backward induction. So by backward induction, what I mean by backward induction is, when you solve the game, you have to start by solving the optimal choice of the last mover for each possible situations, and then work backward to compute the optimal choice for the earlier players, the players in the earlier stages. Okay? So by doing that, you can successfully incorporate the effect of first mover's action onto the later mover's choice. Okay? So it is as if you put yourself in the shoes of the first mover, and think about what happens for any possible choice of yours, right? Like you did in this game, Starcade World game. Here, you are putting yourself in player 1's shoes and asking what happens in the second stage for any choice of yours, for any choice of Q1 you can make. Okay, and then by doing this calculation, you can actually predict what is the game outcome for any choice of yours, Q1. Okay, and then given that you move backward, you move backward to the first stage, and then taking everything into account, especially the effect of your choice onto the other player's choice, then you can solve the game. You can solve your profit maximization problem successfully. Okay. Any questions so far? Okay, so and the idea of backward induction is kind of clear, intuitive, and easy to understand. And we're going to actually use that idea to provide, I'm going to using that idea of backward induction, and will provide the alternative notion of equilibrium, alternative to Nash equilibrium. And that solution concept, alternative equilibrium concept, will be called soft-game perfect equilibrium. And actually the very basic idea of soft-game perfect equilibrium is just nothing but backward induction. Okay? Okay, so I think this is just perfect time to ask any question if you have anything to ask. So, the thing we did here is not really easy one. I mean, it's a very actually subtle and somehow complicated. Our argument and reasoning is complicated, complicated case. So it's not really surprising at all. You don't have anything unclear to you. So if you have any questions, please. Okay, then if you have questions, break until 7:20. Okay, and after the break, I'm gonna give you the notion of subgame perfectly.
他是打算放2次吗 ？break。他就10分钟啊，应该20分钟。对呀、对。打印什么呀？什么东西啊？哦，作业啊。这多少页啊？8页。这看着这我就不想打呀，没用吧？
企起身嗰陣，我點會問嘢嘅時候？
他考试不考那个，不考时间。这么多页，天哪！我本来那天想在家打印的，结果不是，结果那个打印机没有碳粉了。看不清楚。
No. This is player. Player 1 chooses idle equal A, right? So if player 1 gives A, then he chooses F instead of A, right? If here player 1 chooses A, and player 2 chooses I,
你像我这种
right?
上课
So
不
if
下课
player 1
问你
gives
们
A, that means player 1 chooses F, right?
他怎么不去买可乐呢？
Player 1 chooses either A or F. Player 2 chooses either I or
哎，小马哥，
O,
我
right?
们组那
So
个
AI means player 1
退的那
chooses
个
A,
3那个，
player 2
那
chooses
个你
I.
看了吧？
So this is
没有你认识的，就是说特别讨厌的。
And we are asking if anyone has copy of the game.
讨厌的，
Right?
大家
Let's
都知
begin.
道，反正那种。
Let's begin with player 1. Okay? Here player 1 chooses A, and player 2 chooses I. And if player 1 gives A, that means player 1
他
chooses
怎么不
F.
上来的？
Right? Because
我们好像
initially
有这个。
player 1 was A.
叫什么？
Right. So then player 2
什么？
to kick into